Hey guys, another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist and our mini series on raising children in Japan. A little bit out of sequence, but thought we'd better talk about the choosing a name issue, because it can be a little bit of an issue. It doesn't matter whether you're going to be raising your kids in Japan or whether you think later on you might be moving back to whatever country you came from. It's inevitable that the kids will have some ongoing connection with both countries, most likely. So even if you do move back to your own country, at some stage in the future there might be some connection for them with Japan. I mean, it's sort of inevitable, isn't it? If you've got one parent that's Japanese and one parent that's something else, you're obviously going to be connected to both those two countries for the rest of your life, probably. And for that reason, it's considerate. It's kind of us to consider carefully what name we give them, because for a start, the family name thing in Japan is an issue, because in a lot of the countries that we come from, there's a mix of people from all around the world, which means that you get people with different names all the time. So it's not that unusual for us, is it? If you're from the UK or Europe or Australia or America or Canada, or most of those places have people from all around the world. And we're used to that, aren't we? We're used to meeting people with radical names that we haven't heard before, you know? And it's no big deal, is it? You know, someone tells you their name and you haven't heard it before, you go, well, that's a good one, how do you spell that? And it's no big deal, is it? Whereas in Japan, there's not that many combinations of names in Japan. So any name that's a little bit different, even a Japanese name, if it's a little bit rare and people haven't heard it before, they make a real fuss about it. Because they're used to everybody, all the name, you know, Yamanaka, Yamanashi, Yamashita, they've heard it all before. So when they hear a name they haven't heard before, they make a real fuss. And we've talked about this before, that quite often in Japan, anything that's different from what people are used to seeing every day, anything that's slightly different, they tend to make a really big fuss about. And that, you know, at first that makes you feel all sort of windswept and interesting, but after a while it can sort of drive you crazy if every time you give them your name you get a big fuss about it. And of course the kids are going to have that too. You know, if they grow up in Japan, that, you know, at school and that sort of thing, they're going to be constantly having hassles with their family name. And, you know, it's very rare to have a foreign family name that's easy for Japanese people to pronounce or spell, so you constantly have to spell it for them and they don't know how to pronounce it. And even the simplest name, I mean, Smith in English is Sumisu in Japanese. So, you know, it's very rare to have a foreign family name that's easy for Japanese people to spell or to say. So that's a constant pain. You know, everywhere you go, and as an adult too, everywhere you go, it's constantly a thing. You know, the people in the bank want to call your name out, they can't say it, and they sort of hesitate and stare at it, and you know that it's you, because the Japanese names, they just call it out, but when they get to your name, they're just staring at it, you know. So it's a constant thing. The other thing is that most Japanese people's family names are written with 2 or 3 kanji, which means that most documents and forms and things only have space for 2 or 3 or maybe 4 kanji, which means if you've got, you know, a name, a foreign name, that when it's written in katakana will become even longer. I mean, Smith is a fairly short name, but when you write Sumisu, it becomes longer, you know. And names, most foreign names are the same. They end up being really long because it's the only way to write them in katakana. And then you're always running out of space on forms. And we showed you once before a bank, you know, bank gave us a passport that had half the family name on it because there wasn't enough room for the whole thing, and that happens all the time as well. So that's a constant pain. So the point is, if the kids are going to have to be living with a family name that they're going to get a big fuss about all the time, it's really considerate it's being considerate if we can give them a given name that isn't going to cause a big fuss, right? So I'll just mention before I go on too, that Japanese people usually only have 2 names. They have their given name and their family name. And again, most forms and documents and things like that don't usually have room for the 3rd name. And we've talked about this on previous videos. The 3rd name thing, the middle name thing, or the 3rd name thing confuses the hell out of all sorts of bureaucratic systems and makes constant hassles. And the three name thing, you end up, you know, no two documents will be the same. You end up with, they choose which one they're going to put first and which one they're going to put second, and they end up cutting off names because there's not enough room on the document, you know. So really, we can't really give our kids three names if they're going to be living in Japan or spending time in Japan. So, or even just have Japanese documentation. So you really have to just stick with having a family name, and a given name is really the best way to go. And of course, like with all our how-to videos, this is just some observations based on what we've experienced ourselves and what we've seen other people around us experience. And of course, you can do whatever you want, you know. And we know people have given some kids some names. We know a few foreigners that have given their kids names that are just impossible in Japanese, you know. One guy called his kid Max, and I mean, Max in English is easy, but Makusu, and he regrets it now, because what happened was he called him Max, and then they wrote that in katakana, and then when they made his passport, they put it back into Romaji again, and it ended up being Makusu, Makusu, instead of Max. So his passport has Makusu written on it. That's one of the problems, one of the many problems. So it's really wise, you know, you can do whatever you want. There was another guy, an English guy, I wish I remember the name. He picked a name that had R's and L's in it, and it was just a nightmare. I was like, why would you give a kid who lives in Japan a name like that? Nobody can say it, you know? So it's really wise and considerate to the kids if we can give them a name that they know. And probably the easiest way to do that is to start with names that are Japanese, that are okay in whatever your native language is, whether that's English or German or French or whatever it is, you know. That's probably the easiest way to go, because the Japanese is limited by the katakana and the katakana pronunciation. And so that's why most names, you know, most names are just impossible. You know, Jonathan becomes Jonason or Jonashon. You know, it's just endless. There's just the simplest names. Sutiban, Stephen becomes a Sutiban. You know, Roberto. You know, it's a mess. It's a mess. So it's probably easier to start with the Japanese names and then see if they fit in English, and see if or whatever language your home language is, and see if your family's going to mess it up. Because that's the other thing. If you get a name that works in Japanese, you know, if we get one like Misato, which is a cute Japanese girl's name, Misato. We get Misato. You name your kid Misato. How's that going to be in your native language? How are your family going to pronounce that? M-I-S-A-T-O. Misato? Probably our Australian relatives would probably look at it and say, Misato? You know, and it's just, again, do you want to curse the kids with a name that their family can't say? You know, and of course the family will learn to say it, but you know, they're going to be constantly having this through their life. They're going to spend time in your home country, and everybody's going to be getting their name wrong, and you know, so it's kind of us if we can find a name that's sort of bulletproof. And the best thing to do is just to find names that you're happy with, and then just bounce them off the people from both countries. So, you know, you find a name. Ken is one. Ken, K-E-N for boys. A boy's name, Ken. That's a Japanese name, Ken. There's some famous guys in Japan called Ken. It's a Japanese name, and so obviously that's an easy one in English. Ken. It's bulletproof. You write K-E-N. It's going to be on the passport. K-E-N. Everybody can get that one right, can't they? You know, Yoshi. Okay. Yoshi, Y-O-S-H-O, Japanese name. So it's fine in Japan. Write it down in an email and send it to your family, or spell it to them over the phone or over Skype or something, and ask them to say it. And, you know, because chances are, I think our Australian friends would say Yoshi. I don't know, what would our American friends say if they hadn't seen it before? Yoshi. Yoshi? Yoshi. Yoshi? Who knows? So that's basically what you're up against. So you've that's the easiest way to go. I mean, you can go the opposite way. You know, it is true that you know that some Japanese people choose sort of fake foreign names. We know a girl called Cocoa, and Cocoa, that's what they call cocoa, right? C-O-C-O-A, the thing you make chocolate milk with, cocoa. And there's, you know, people do that. They'll hear a foreign name and they think it's cool, and they will call their kids that sometimes, then they write it in hiragana. So that is true. I mean, and as with all these how-to videos, there's exceptions to these things, but just based on what we've seen, you know, the kids that we know who've been given odd foreign names, and just our own experience. I mean, you know, living here with a foreign family name is a constant pain. You know, it's a constant pain. You just know when you're at the post office waiting in line and the staff look down and tilt their head to one side, you know that they're trying to work out how to say your name to call you, and you just go, hi. Hi. And they look at you. That's the other funny thing. In the bank, you're sitting in the bank and waiting to be called, you know, and they've got your passport or something, your passbook, bank passbook, and everybody's sitting there waiting to be called, you know, and they, Suzuki-san, hi, you know, Yamanashi-san, hi, and then they get to you and there's this hesitation, and they look at you, because you're the only foreigner sitting in the bank, right? So they get this foreign name and they look across and they look at you, and they go, etto nandake, and then you go, hi, because you know what it is. And it's not a big deal, but you know, I think it's probably, we've got to be more considerate for the kids, because you know, it's different when you're a kid, isn't it? When you're a foreigner who's come here as a foreigner, you know, you sort of got to expect these things. But when you're a kid, and because remember too, these kids, if you have a kid in Japan that's born in Japan, they're really Japanese. But the way the Japanese thinking is, you know, they get treated as different, and being treated as different in Japan is not cool. In a lot of our cultures, being different is cool, isn't it? Oh, he goes his own way, you know, she blazes her own trail, she's an individual, she's a character. That's all cool in a lot of countries, but here, you're really doing your kids, if your kids are going to grow up here, you know, they're going to get sick of being pointed at and people pointing out the differences. I mean, even as a foreigner who's moved here, you get sick of that. You know, every day there's someone pointing out that you're different in some way. You're constantly getting reminded of that every day, no matter how much you try to blend in. And of course, it's because you are different, but it's just when you're used to coming from countries like, you know, coming from Europe or coming from Australia or coming from America, where you can be different and from a different culture and people don't notice, to being here where every little difference is a big deal. For that reason, you know, I think we have to consider the kids and try to help them sort of be a part. And because young kids are pretty good, really, really young kids don't notice the difference. You know, when they're playing with a bunch of kids, they don't notice if one kid happens to have blue eyes or brown eyes, or they don't really give a rat's. Most of the little kids, they just play together. But as they get a bit older, this is where you want to make it as easy for them as possible. And again, you don't have to, but I mean, if you met the kid that called Max, or some of the other kids that we've met, you know, I wish I could remember the name. The English guy gave his kid a terrible name. It wasn't Russell, but it was almost as bad. And the Japanese people just can't say it. And it's like, what a curse. Giving the poor kid a name that nobody can spell and nobody can say, you know? So yeah, just play the names. I mean, fortunately, you've got around 9 months, haven't you, usually, to work the name thing out, and just bounce them off both families. Bounce them off your Japanese family and bounce them off your family from home, and see if everybody can say it, everybody can write it. And there is a few. Once you start getting into it, there are a few that you can come up with. So choosing a name, there it is. As far as some people, we've been asked about this lots of times, about taking a Japanese name. I mean, people do it. There are some foreigners that come here and take their Japanese partner's name. So, you know, like foreign guys that come here and get married and take their wife's family name. You can do it. You can do it. It's probably that's probably good for the kids if you can do that. That's an individual choice, of course, because that's going to affect a few people if you do that. It always seems a bit strange to me because the person who's been born here is Japanese. The foreigner who comes here, even if you live here forever and get permanent residency and everything, you're still a foreigner. And I think even that gets a reaction. You know, if a foreigner comes here and lives here forever and changes their name to a Japanese name, you know, hi, I'm Suzuki, you're still going to get a reaction because you're going to say, I'm Suzuki, then you're going to go, you've got a Japanese name, and you're still going to have to explain it. So it's not going to solve that many problems, you know. Anyway, there it is. Good luck with that. Actually, to help out our friends who will be faced with this, because there could well be someone watching right now who's got a baby coming who has to try and pick a name. Let's help them out. Let's see if we can come up with some Japanese names like Kent. That's a natural Japanese name that is also cool in English and maybe in other languages as well. If you've got any of those that you know, please just write them in the comments, and that might help some people out then. They might go, oh, there's a good one, there's one I hadn't thought of, let's try that. Musashi, Miyamoto Musashi, one of the probably Japan's most famous swordsmen. Musashi's a cool name. That's my suggestion for a boy, Musashi. Yeah, but of course, it depends on what country you come from. Australians would probably say Masashi. Masashi? What's this, Masashi? Maybe. Okay, what would Americans say? Musashi. Musashi? Anyway, there it is. Yeah, let's come up with a few names, guys, and help some people out. There's a crazy guy. Hello. Alrighty, very good. More videos coming soon.